I wonder, where should we start? Should we start in Chicago? Is that the place to start?
Um, yeah, I think so. There's not a whole lot that went on before then. Um, so I was an undergraduate at the University of Chicago, and my first, I mean, they had a big, very heavy duty core curriculum requirement in Western civilization. And, some of it was a little bit outdated, but um, I happened into, I mean, I was just assigned a three-quarter um, sequence in the humanities. And there was one quarter, my first quarter ever in college, um, which was Ted Cohen's class on philosophy and modern philosophy. Well, actually it was
What
supposed
we
to,
call modern philosophy,
yeah,
I guess.
yeah, it was actually supposed to be a history of philosophy, starting with Plato, but
Oh, right.
skipped Plato, and we started in on Descartes. We did a little Locke, Hume, and well, we were supposed to do Kant too, but we did about 5 minutes on Kant. But I was,
Now, had you wanted to take that class, or it was by
no, no,
accident, or?
no, it was completely by accident. I mean, I really didn't know anything about philosophy before I came, which, I mean, I often think that these core curriculum requirements are not so good. But boy, if you didn't have them, nobody would end up majoring in philosophy because very, very few people encounter it.
Absolutely. I have to tell you, it's exactly what happened to me. I thought I was going to go to law school, and I took a philosophy class with the core curriculum, and it changed everything. So,
Really?
yeah, yeah.
And so your family was okay with that?
No, no, of course not. I was going to be a lawyer, and I became a philosopher. It's
Yeah.
no, eventually they were okay with it. But was your family okay with it?
Yeah, yeah, they didn't, as long as you're happy. I mean, I don't think they expected that much. But yeah, they were happy to go with it actually.
Well,
I
that's
mean,
good. So you took this class, and what happened?
well, I really I I loved it. And I wasn't quite sure whether I liked it. I mean, they were you focused on various passages, and you had to write these very short 500-word responses to various questions. And that was fun because that got me to be more precise and to really look at these passages carefully. But there was also a lot of camaraderie in that class. In fact, I remember the names of about half of the students in that class,
Wow.
which is shocking
Yeah,
because, who
really.
does that? And that hasn't even happened in most of the classes I've taught. So it was really extraordinary. And Ted Cohen in those days was just I don't know if you know him. He died a few years ago, but he focused on aesthetics, but he's probably best known for a book that he wrote about jokes.
Oh, I didn't know
But
that.
anyway, he had a good sense of humor, and I mean, he was very charismatic. He would smoke his Lucky Strike. He could smoke in class in those days, and and sort of go into a reverie and talk about what it was like to be a graduate student at Harvard, which he was, and all of the stuff that was going on there. And so I couldn't quite determine whether it was the subject matter of philosophy that I liked so much, or this experience of being in this class where people really were engaged, and um, and the teacher was very charismatic.
This
So
is one of those classes that sort of everyone took. Is this the one I'm remembering that your husband took too, and then maybe even
did
later your son? Is that?
my son, yes, yes, we're
Yeah,
all
so it was one of those
university
classes
professors.
that gets a reputation.
Yes, well, but it got a mixed reputation. I went on to philosophy. That was the only philosophy class that my husband took. And my son actually double majored in philosophy and history, but he ended up going into history. So there you have it.
Okay, so it did something to you then. So maybe,
That's
yeah.
right. Yes, yes. So, but
But I love that mood you create, because people smoking in the class and this kind of obviously something special happened in that particular one if everyone remembered each other and stuff. And
yeah,
there are special classes like that that happen that sort of something happens and that
yeah. And I mean, there was one person who knit all the time, but asked these really good, this, if I may, pointed questions. And Um, and there were people who went on to do various things, and I've lost touch with most of them. But it was very interesting that I remembered it all, and people really talked to one another. They engaged, and that was nice. And
Yeah.
but so I ended up taking other classes with less charismatic professors, and I ended up liking it. And so I went on to graduate school, and I went to MIT, and it was, I mean, that wasn't my first choice, but I'm glad I was there because a lot of interesting things were going on at the time. The
Oh my goodness. Yeah. When was this exactly? The
I
80s?
went to MIT in, I graduated from college in 72, and then I went the next fall.
So a
And
lot of people would say philosophy was basically being created, around that time at MIT and also Harvard, which we'll get to because you did end up at Harvard a little bit, which I think you'd applied to first,
yes,
and
yes,
then
and
you ended up at MIT.
yeah, but I got to know people there uh, for uh, for various reasons, which I mean, basically they needed TAs at Harvard, and MIT didn't have enough space. So I was the first pioneer to go down there, and I was a teaching assistant for Quine's logic class, which was
Oh, wow. Yeah, Quine. But before we get to Quine at Harvard, at MIT, you were also in the middle of this was like when the philosophy of mind was sort of joining forces with the linguistics building or something, and Jerry
yes.
Fodor was there, I think,
Oh,
and
he was. Yes,
Ned
yes,
Block, and I mean, you
yeah,
really,
yeah.
for those who are philosophy nerds, everybody was, building their theories at that time, right?
Yeah, yeah, it was really interesting. And there, of course, Chomsky was in
Oh yeah, Chomsky too. Goodness.
yeah, and Morris Hawley, and it was really a group. But at that time, or during the time I was at MIT, there was, I mean, philosophy had its own debate. It was in the humanities um, section, and there was the worry, well, actually, the threat that philosophy would just be kind of absorbed into the humanities and wouldn't have its autonomy. But at that point, there were some people who had joint appointments in philosophy and linguistics. And I mean, there were all sorts of twists and turns here, which not only would be boring, but I can't remember them all. So I
Well,
couldn't.
yeah, but one interesting thing which I was thinking about is the language of thought. And I mean, do you think that merger with linguistics had a big influence on actually like the philosophy that was happening with, for example, Jerry Fodor?
No,
Okay.
I mean, Jerry Fodor was interested in linguistics and psychology for a long time. I mean, I mean, Descartes was a great 17th century example of a polymath. I mean, including his mathematical,
Yeah.
you know,
That whole science strain, which
the science
also
strain.
becomes important for your work, but
He did, real work in science. He did real work in mathematics, Cartesian coordinates that are probably better known than Cartesian dualism among some. And so, he really had it all. Now, there are a few people are um, who do know science and I mean very well and do philosophy of science too. But now it seems that people, it's easier and also very relevant for people who um, have who count as polymaths are people who do serious philosophy and serious linguistics and or serious psychology all together. They make real contributions in all those fields. And that's pretty good. And Jerry Fodor really is an example of that. And he really did serious psychology and serious philosophy. And his psychology most of the time, not all of the time, did inform his philosophy and vice versa. So it was very nice to see that.
So you were in his classes and around him, but why did you end up with Ned Block as your supervisor, which is a more general functionalism instead of that sort of I guess representationalism, more specific representationalism. What happened there? I mean,
Yeah, that's an interesting question too. I think at that time that I was, more interested in kind of getting the hang a the general hang of an alternative to behaviorism and just physicalism of the type identity sort. And I wanted to see what was going on. And I was probably I don't know if I was the absolute first, but I was one of Ned's first um, uh, uh, dissertation students.
oh,
And
you were one of his
yeah,
first
yeah.
PhDs. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so one of his first, maybe the first, I can't quite remember, but it was around there.
That's
And
very interesting.
um, and so we were, he was learning, I guess, how to be a dissertation advisor. And he has supervised so many. I mean, he really is a superstar.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. I actually had the chance to go to one of his seminars at NYU not too long ago, and he's still at it, still. I lost you. I can't hear you anymore or see you.
okay. Can you see? Because I
Oh, now
couldn't
you're
hear
back.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I couldn't hear you.
Okay. Anyway, yeah. So tell me a little bit, like, what was it like at that time, and what were you thinking about? How did you end up with Ned as his first PhD? What were you working on?
But I wasn't quite ready to either be swept up in the ongoing research program of Jerry Fodor or to take a step in opposition to it because I felt that I really wanted to master these more general questions first. And I'm glad I did. I've read a lot of Jerry Fodor in between and talked to him, and he's wonderful. But I think I made the right decision. Andrea, I am. Uh, can you hear me?
Oh,
Because
now I do. Yeah, I missed that whole thing. I don't know what happened. It just went off. Now you're
yeah,
back.
I wonder if it's me. It
I
might
don't
be.
know. Do you have anything else open? I'll close all my.
No, I don't actually.
So it
Wait a
should, I
minute.
don't know. Maybe it's just the internet for a minute.
Yeah.
It
Uh,
seems okay now. I'm sorry, but yeah, so what we were I missed the whole thing you said about
about
Ned or any of that.
yeah. Well, I I didn't feel that I was ready either to be swept into a research program or to stand in opposition to it, and I was gradually getting much more convinced that, oh, yes, there really is, there really are interesting processes that go on in the mind. And let's see how you can give a general characterization of them that's not too behaviorist and is not uh, a JJC Smart type of identity theory. And so it was really good for me to read some of the burgeoning literature on it. And Jerry Fodor did a lot of it. And Jerry and Ned wrote some important papers together too against behaviorism. So, and in
Yeah,
favor
it's
of,
funny. You said you were kind of a secret behaviorist or something. Do I remember that correctly? Like, I mean, you
yes,
seem
I
to have been
do.
kind of fighting yourself on that one a little bit.
Yes, yes. It's one of these embarrassing things that I remember, although I try to shut down. And
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's embarrassing because when you talk about, it's a kind of behaviorism that's maybe scientific, right? But when you're thinking about philosophical behaviorism as you describe it later, or even I'm thinking of like Edward Tolman and this
yes.
kind of, then actually I don't think it's embarrassing. But tell me why it was embarrassing for you or what was going on.
Oh well, I mean, nobody was behaviorist, yeah. But and at some point. I wasn't, but I was attracted to the idea that, yeah, uh, maybe you can explain a lot by talking about what people are disposed to do under certain environmental circumstances, and you could get a lot farther with that than people had thought. But functionalism, at least analytic or philosophical functionalism, I suppose, is like behaviorism in that the mental states are defined all at once in terms of what people will do if they have various combinations of those states given certain environmental stimulations. So it is a more realistic, I think, less objectionable version of behaviorism, and it is compatible or compatible enough with physicalism, even though it's not strictly speaking a physicalistic view. And it seemed a lot more promising and really worth pursuing. And a lot of people are functionalists now.
Indeed, yes. And it's even, I mean, all of that's changing in a way, but for those who don't really understand what we're talking about with all these words, because this audience is so broad, but the, I remember you said you just always thought physicalism was sort of normal or something. Is that what you said? You know, of course everything is physical or something like this was kind of your feeling. And then of course when we have to justify it philosophically, this is a whole other thing which we're getting into. But just for those who don't really understand, like what does it really mean to think about physicalism in a broad sense?
Okay, well, what physicalism is, and again, there are lots of
Many
different
theories.
ways to define it, but what a fairly common way that is sufficiently broad, I think, is to say that, well, what a physicalist thinks is that what a general physicalist thinks is that everything in the world, objects, properties, relations, etc., are physical, or they they are nothing over and above the physical. Now, so I've used the word physicalism, I've used the word or the words over and nothing over and above. Now, what is it to be a physical property or object or event or relation? Well, maybe this is begging the question, but many believe that, well, at least for a start, it includes, I mean, being physical includes being one of these items that are theorized about, that are mentioned in the physical sciences, including physics, chemistry, biology, maybe psychology, or at least certain parts of psychology. And nothing over and above means that whatever else there is, if you will, supervenes on the physical, the items mentioned in the physical sciences. What is it to supervene? Well, uh, basically, the idea is that if you have allegedly two different things, that if they're really different, they must be underlain by a physical difference. No difference without a physical difference. So that, you may have these things, but if there's no physical difference between them, then they're not really two, they're one. So was that understandable?
Absolutely, it was wonderful. I would just say before we move on to some more specific things that this, I guess people could feel this in contrast to mental or something like that. Or I guess we could talk about Fodor or Ned or Quine we haven't brought up yet, but what are we trying to understand when we're trying to understand the mind? Is it this experience that we have that we call thinking, or how would you sort of define that? Because it sounds like we're trying to figure out something and see if it's physical or not, but maybe we need to talk a little bit about what that is.
Okay, what physicalism is a theory of? Yes. Uh,
Yeah, what's the real question here that when it comes to philosophy and mind and language of thought and all of these kinds of things. Why would we even have this question for those who are not, philosophers or trained in philosophy?
Well, it seems that people, or many people, are interested in what it is, I mean, what the nature, if you will, is of mental states. And that includes thinking, what goes on when we think, what goes on when we feel. That is, we have bodily sensations like pain and nausea and itching and things like that, and joy, ecstasy, if you will, love, and what goes on when we have perceptual experiences. That is, when we look out into the world and we see colors and shapes and um, everything in other people, the world around us, what goes on when we are in moods. I mean, all these things are supposed to be things that involve or are located in the mind. So if you're asking what's interesting about the mind, I think the question is, well, what's going on when all of these things are happening to us, or all of these things that we're doing? Because sometimes we do these things, sometimes we are subject to them. And all those things, I think, are interesting to a lot of people. So, what
Yeah.
goes on when we're doing all these things? What goes on when we think? How is it that our thoughts can be about items in the world? I mean, that's a question about representationalism. What on earth? How is it that what goes on in the mind can reach out, can connect up with items in the world, or can it? Maybe it can't. So those are
Yeah.
the
How do we
questions.
know that it does? Yeah.
Exactly. That too.
Yeah. These are the
Now,
sort
how
of
do we know?
questions. And then language coming in too. What is that doing? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And can you represent the world and have thoughts, if you will, without language? I mean, that's a really interesting question too.
Absolutely. And we kind of skipped over because you did start to teach, you're a TA at at Harvard, and you were actually, I mean, I just have to say this because there are some really hardcore philosophers who will be amazed, but not only were you around Fodor and Block and all these people, but also you were TAing for Quine, right?
Yes, and it
Okay.
was
Amazing. Yeah. If you
roles.
want to share any stories about that. But I'm just thinking, okay, here you are in this class, your physical body, you're in this class, you're doing the work, but it's through language and you're having all these experiences. And so what we're really trying to understand here is, are those all sort of the same kind of stuff, or what would you think about that? Or if you have anything to share about that moment, but also just to try to put it into this kind of real life situation.
Um, well, in any real life situation, I guess you're doing a lot of things at the same time. You're thinking, you're wondering, I mean, okay, you're thinking about things, you're perceiving various things. Sometimes your perceptions get uh, distracted by your thoughts and you don't notice certain things. How does that work? You are feel if you're sitting down, you're feeling the seat beneath you. If you're, if you have sort of a sore leg or something, then you can notice when you move around. And so all these things are going on when you are just sort of awake and paying attention, at least to some degree, that, you'll notice all these things and oh yeah, well, I'm thinking, but my mind is wandering. And look, I can't help but sort of look out of the corner of my eye to see if there's something interesting happening over to my right or to my left. And so, is what's going on in all these cases uh, to be characterized in the same way? Are there interesting and important differences between thoughts and sensations and perceptions? And well, it seems that, gee, thoughts are mental states that are, at least in most cases, about something. either in the world or in your own body or about you yourself in general, whereas sensations and perceptions have this, if you will, this qualitative character, this what it's like, as Thomas Nagel says, and has really become the phrase of choice to describe this, what it's like to have those states or to be in those states. And some people think, oh, well, thoughts are essentially representational. You can have thoughts without there being any particular qualitative character to your thoughts. There might not be anything special that can be characterized as what it's like, to think that Paris is beautiful or that it's sunny outside, that goes beyond sort of picturing being sunny outside, etc. And that, so there's a distinction, a separation between thoughts because they necessarily have that, whereas sensations and perceptions, well, necessarily there's something that it's like to perceive or to feel or to have an emotion, etc. But these days, the lines of separation have been vanishing, and many people think that perceptions and even bodily sensations are also representational, that perceptions, represent, truly or falsely what's out there in the world, and bodily sensations, even pains and experiences of various other sensations, represent what's going on in the body. Moods can represent certain general states of the world. Ah, and on the other hand, there are people that are, I mean, an increasing number of people who engage in what they call cognitive phenomenology. That is, that they say that they propose that thoughts not only have sort of this general kind of content that this general feeling you can be aware of, but that each and every different type of thought has a special what it's like character to it, so that what it's like to um, I don't know, what it's like to think that world peace would be good is phenomenologically, that is what it's like to think that is importantly different from what it's like to think that universal charity is good, let alone more mundane thoughts like, oh, I have to go to the grocery store after class, or, ooh, I hope my parking meter hasn't run out. And so that um, there's a special what it's likeness to have those thoughts. It can't just be reduced to the other kind of pictures that come into your mind when you're thinking these things. So,
Right.
so a lot of people now uh, proposed this. There's a whole book written by Angela Mendelevici about this, and a lot of people have this view. And so it's interesting that what seemed to be a sharp line between what you can say about thoughts and sensations seems to be ragged at best.
Yes, absolutely. That's happening in a lot of different fields. I think this kind of sort of clarifying and blurring at once.
Yes,
Um, but it's kind of interesting because I think a lot of the work that we were talking about that started in the 70s that seemed so oppositional in this way sort of helped us get to that point where we can handle that weird clarified blurriness, or I don't know, holding the paradox or whatever it is. But you wrote a book called Metaphysics of Mind, which I would recommend to people if they want like a short, very well written sort of understanding of all these things that were developing, all these different theories that were developing or that have been developing. What you talk about dualism, you talk about type identity theory, you talk about functionalism, you talk about Russellian monism, eliminativism, illusionism. I mean, there's many that we could talk about here, but maybe we could just pick a few that you think kind of shows us what that oppositional nature was or is, that we're sort of becoming more clarified about and blurrier about at the same time. Also, we should probably talk about the word metaphysics a little bit because you do talk about that in the beginning of the book, and it is metaphysics of mind.
Mhm.
So maybe we start there first. Like, what do you really mean by metaphysics?
Well, metaphysics is, I mean, the term metaphysical is used in sort of New Age circles to
Yes,
mean
absolutely.
something
Yeah.
something spiritual, which is, maybe that could be one kind of metaphysics, but metaphysical questions are usually taken to be questions about what there is, um, and what that is what is there in the world? Is there basically, I mean, are there basically just mental entities? Are there physical entities? What are properties? And what is or what are the natures of things? And so to determine their nature, you have to determine not just, or you have to have a theory not just of what there actually is and what things actually do, and not just a theory of what, given what we've observed about what there actually is and what those things actually do, that you can use inductive principles like scientific principles to predict what they will do under different circumstances that could occur. Metaphysical questions, at least mostly, involve what's possible. That is, things that might not be scientifically possible, like jumping over the moon, let's say, cows or people. Is this metaphysically possible? I mean, is there some sort of, um, I mean, is this sort of thing? I mean, it will, I mean, not only may it never happen actually, but it can't happen according to science, but is it possible in some other sense? Uh, and that is it in the nature of human beings not to be able to jump over the moon? Maybe, maybe not, but that involves thinking about things that go beyond science. Now, maybe that wasn't a particularly good example. Maybe better examples are whether, well, I guess we could stick with that one, but it makes
Yeah.
metaphysical
I
questions.
lost you anyway for a minute, but I think that was a good example.
But it may make metaphysical questions seem not so interesting after all. But but I mean, think about what are the basic properties in the world, and those things might go beyond pure scientific speculation. What about uh, and what about time? I mean, is time something that persists? I mean, do present, past, and future exist all at once? Or is there sort of a spotlight present so that here everything that exists, ex everything that exists now exists, then you move on to the next time period and only that exists? Or is it more like a block so that you go and you move from one temporal period to another, but it all is still here? And what does that mean? And how would that work? And once you start thinking about these things, then you think, these are interesting questions. Or think about this about a statue. Let's say a statue of Goliath. That's an example that people use a lot. Now, it's made of some sort of substance. It's made of clay, let's say. Now, is the statue the same thing as the clay? Now, what does that mean? Does it mean that if they're the same thing, then they both have to come into existence and go out of existence at the same time? So if you crush the statue, or if it starts breaking apart, you've still got the clay, but you don't have the statue. Now, is that definitive? Does that mean that they're not the same thing? Well, That depends. And what happens if you have the clay and the statue um, come into existence at the same time? That is, you somehow manufacture the clay and you mold it into the statue at the very same time, and that then the universe gets destroyed. Now, are we talking about two things or one thing? And what do you have to do to determine? You presumably have to determine, well, what would have happened, and what gives you justification for saying that it's this rather than that. So things about composition, things about time, um, and um, uh, and also moral questions, at least some of them, questions about the self. I mean, is the self just a bunch of changing states about what's going on in your mind and body at a particular time that gets strung together? Or is there some sort of substantial self that we can access by introspection at different times? And so getting clear about those questions and trying to figure out what could answer them and arguing one way or the other about them are, I think, better examples of metaphysical questions. You don't really have to imagine wild fantasies like uh, humans jumping over the moon, but what is the nature of um, time, self, moral acts? How about free will and determinism? Are those compatible or not? Science isn't going to tell you. Uh, Science has to, um, and you have to find a definition that's acceptable of what it is to have free will. And determinism is, well, that's a little bit hard too, but that's usually agreed on what determinism is. And so is free will compatible with determinism? Is Do we need to, I mean, can we have autonomy? Uh, Whether or not that's the same as free will, I think it's a little bit different, but can we have autonomy in a deterministic world? Uh, so that's similar to the question about whether we can have free will in a deterministic world. Determinism meaning that if you start with some initial conditions, maybe the Big Bang, maybe something else, and you fix the laws of nature, that everything from that point on is necessitated or determined. And that just means that as a matter of natural law, things will happen. Now, is it possible to have free will, even though there is no way that you can get out of the sequence of what will happen? To put it another way, if I'm sitting here and I decide to raise my hand like that, do I do it of my own free will, even though given the initial conditions and the laws, um, well, this is really, you have to think really hard before you put it this way, or you have to think hard about putting it in a way that doesn't beg the question, even though the laws of nature um, would have it that in a law-like way that I raise my hand. Is it still possible that I could have done otherwise? And so there are a lot of people now who are working on the question of what it is to be able to do otherwise. And is that compatible with determinism? So there are lots of metaphysical questions like that, which are
Right, wonderful. It's just everything we're interested in a way, even, but really thinking about it, you talk about armchair philosophy. I love it that you actually defend armchair philosophy in a
yeah.
way. And you defend science, which is again that, holding the paradox, which I love about your work. But why? So we were talking about mind, and you described that really well. And we were talking about the physical. How does that come into play with all these questions? Why do we need to care about that? And why have we had all these theories that say either like dualism, that they're separate things, or like monism, that they're one thing? Why has that mattered?
Um, well, matter to what?
To trying to talk about metaphysics, I guess, or all those questions you raised, the free will, the time, Um, yeah, pick any of them, I guess, or it doesn't have to have mattered so much as why has it been such an argument
About mind. Well,
about
uh,
is mind dualistic, is mind monistic, physical. You can take your pick of how you might want to, which maybe just two kind of to loosely cartoon it a little bit, two different ways that have that one that says everything is one way and one that says everything is
uh,
another. Yeah.
yeah. Well, uh, I think that it's natural, at least for some people, to think, what is it to be me? And I mean, this is the way Descartes starts actually in the
Mm.
first meditation. Gee, I've been doubting various things, and I'm just wondering what it is if I kind of pursue my doubts and pursue my wonderment about what I really am, I can get clear, in fact, have a clear and distinct conception of what it is to be me. And so he
Which
says,
is something I think we all have at some point in some way. I don't, do you think you had it first with your philosophy class, or do you remember having that before? Just this,
oh, I've
where
had,
you realize you're someone and you start to wonder what that even means. You become aware of your
yes,
thoughts and so on.
yes. And also, what what could I lack and still be me? And what could I lack and still have thoughts? And so Descartes goes through it. Well, you know, do I need various, I mean, he doesn't quite do this, but many people do. If I um, lost an arm or a leg or whatever and still was living, would I still be me? Well, yeah, or so he thinks, so he says. And what if I were dreaming and that the world around me and even the nature of my body is completely different from the way that I think it is in waking life? Would I still be me? And he says, yes. Because why? Well, because I still have my thoughts and some sort of my thoughts and at least my memories of perceptions, etc. Now, what if, he says, and this is really the big canon, what if there were an evil genius who devoted all its powers to deceiving me, to making me think that there was a world out there um, in all aspects, but that I think a world that's different from the world of my waking life in all aspects. But nope, but nothing really is the way it seems, even mathematics and even geometry, because you have to take a step to get from one premise to another into the conclusion in a mathematical or a geometrical proof. And, the evil genius could mess with you and still make you think that you got the right answer. I mean, this evil genius could do a lot.
Yes. The
um,
old
or
demon.
so Descartes said. And so he comes to the conclusion then that he can exist because, it would still be me, that it would still be Descartes that the evil genius was doing his stuff to, his illusory stuff. And well,
And by
then,
me, he means this sense that he can be aware of his own body and his own self that we call sort of thinking and is usually attached to mind, but doesn't necessarily have to be. This kind of thing we talk about is inner often.
yeah. Yeah, well, his view was that the only thing that that requires us to have in order to survive, to exist even under the spell of the evil genius, is that we can think, we can have thoughts. And thoughts include um, perceptions and doubts and being certain and having mental states. So, what we need to exist, and all we need to exist, Descartes says, is to have a mind. That is, to be a substance he says, an immaterial substance that has the capacity to think in this broad way. And so he gets to it by trying to shave away in thought all these other things that we may have thought were essential. That is, a body, let alone an environment. He doesn't talk about gender or anything like that. We just can continue to exist as ourselves, as an entity, as long as we have the capacity to think in this broad way. Okay, so
And so that's
that's one way.
started to feel like something separate from the physical somehow, um,
Absolutely.
as if that's what we've called mental.
Yes.
But then the question comes, maybe that is just some kind of bodily physical thing, like C fibers firing at some certain moment or something like this. So could you talk about that a little bit about how it seemed to be sort of bifurcated, but then that tension of that bifurcation felt like it needed to be solved?
Absolutely. Yes. So why can't the so this is where all this stuff that then gets picked up by Kripke and Chalmers and Jackson and the whole zombie, what it's like, and Thomas Nagel, of course.
Yeah, Nagel, Jackson, Chalmers. You talk about all of them in the book. Who
Yeah,
else? Kripke, you already said.
yeah.
Basically, all those are arguments against that it's just physical.
Yes,
Yep.
and they use Descartes because Descartes says, "Look, I can have an idea of myself, my mind, in this way as something that is capable of thinking and perceiving and all these things, and I also have a conception of my body, this physical thing that takes up space and is capable of moving. Now." I think really hard about what's physical about me, my body, my ability to move, etc., and my shape, size, etc. And I then think very, very carefully about my capacity to think. And there's nothing in those thoughts. And also, I have, Descartes says, a clear and distinct perception or conception of both these things. That is, I know enough about them. I have a complete enough thought about them that guarantees that they exist on both sides. So, I mean, anything that can move, take up space, etc., counts as physical. Anything that can think counts as mental. And there's no connection that I can find between them. There's no conceptual connection. There's nothing in my complete thought of the mind and my complete thought of the body that shows how they could be connected at all. And I have a full and complete thought of both of them. So because I can conceive in that right way of the one existing without the other and vice versa, then, and Descartes goes through various steps about it, including that God wouldn't mislead, a good God wouldn't mislead us about these things, and that,
Hmm.
yeah, God is good even though we make mistakes. So he has to go through a bunch of different meditations to get those out of the way. But then he says, well, because of all this, and because I can continue to conceive of the one without, well, conceive of them both and, and find no connection between them, I can conclude that they are distinct. So he now is laying the foundation for this view that if you can have certain sorts of conceptions of the one without the other, then they're distinct. And that's what comes up um, in the zombie arguments, which, I mean, but we'll talk about them in a minute. Frank Jackson's argument, Kripke's argument. Um,
Frank Jackson is the merry one for those who know the
yeah,
knowledge.
yeah. By the way, he's changed his view, you know.
Has he?
Yeah, in
Oh,
1994, he now is a
oh, I thought.
representationalist. He thinks that, oh yeah, if we recognize that these states, that these thoughts represent the world, then we can be physicalists. But I don't think that
Well,
really.
that's really interesting. I did know that, but I thought you meant he changed it again or something. But what's
Mm,
that? What's that physicalist? Because that's what, that's your work. Your work is really showing that, and we haven't really brought that out yet in comparison to this more dualistic notion that we've been describing.
yes. Okay. Well, so what what a physicalist would say about Descartes' view, which is called, not surprisingly, Cartesian dualism or substance dualism, which holds that there are two distinct kinds of things in the world. That is, there are minds and there are bodies. And, you know, which minds get connected up with which bodies. You don't know. There's an extra thing in the world that is, or a bunch of things, this material stuff and this mental, non-material stuff. I mean, what is it? It's just immaterial. It exists through time, but it doesn't take up space. Whereas God, if God exists, is supposed to be eternal. That is, it never begins and is sort of always there and will never end. At least that's one conception of the difference between God's mind and human minds, that, there's a definite beginning and there's a definite end. Or at least maybe there's a definite end, but there's at least a beginning. And because, if mind and body are separate, then gee, it's possible that minds could continue to exist even though the body decays and ceases to exist. I mean, that's the hope, I think, of a lot of
That's probably
people.
part of why these are also attractive to think
Yes.
about.
Yeah, and
Um,
then also another way that you can get this intuition that minds are separate from bodies is to elaborate on this idea that I'm sure we've all had about being able to look down or to be aware of what's going on around us, including what's going on with your own body. I mean, people can imagine, I think, that they can wash themselves, get out of bed and get dressed and things like that, or they can watch themselves or their bodies being, falling off a cliff or getting run over by a car or something like that, and they still can sort of be aware of this. And so, doesn't that suggest that minds are distinct from bodies? Because here seems to be a case in which the mind continues to exist and the body doesn't. So, I mean, there are lots of things that you could challenge about this. How exactly are you aware of this? Don't you have to be seeing it? Doesn't that anyway? But there really is this intuition, I think, that yes, you could be observing various things occurring to your body and still continue to exist. And this hope that, well, if minds can continue without bodies, there's at least a hope for immortality or a longer life, as long as it's the life of the mind. And so there are these intuitions that really support dualism. But there are problems too. That is, how exactly are these minds and bodies connected? And and what exactly happens when you something happens in your body which produces a thought about what's going on in the world, or a pain, or some other bodily sensation. And Descartes is actually really good about neurophysiology, or at least the neurophysiology of the time, until you get to the point where what's going on in the body affects something in the mind. That is, it produces a thought, it produces a desire, it produces some sort of um, bodily sensation. You stub your toe and then you feel pain. Well, stubbing your toe, on Descartes' view, is a physical state, and it produces something that goes on in this immaterial mind, a mental state. How does that work? How do you get causation between the physical and the mental? And then, if you feel pain, then that in turn produces various movements in the body you will say ouch, or you'll hold your toe, or you will go to the medicine cabinet and get aspirin or something like that. And so how does that work? So he's very good at the neurophysiology, but then what happens when the mental state or the state of mind is produced is, well, like that famous cartoon where you see these mathematicians doing this very, very complicated equation on the blackboard. And then one of them says, oh, and then a miracle happens. I should have brought that cartoon, but probably many people have seen it. Um,
Yeah, I can show it.
oh, great. Yeah, so you know it,
Mhm.
obviously. Probably everybody else does too.
Yeah, I
And
think we all have that feeling, right? That we know our that physical seems so different from our experience of the physical. And it's
yes,
very hard for us to understand how those things could be the same thing, even though, of course, we see how connected they are all the time. I mean, we go for a run, we're in a different mental state or whatever. It's very hard for us to be experiencing it and not sort of separate it because it's almost as if we're having a kind of conversation with our own self. And just as when I'm having a conversation with you, I feel like you're different than me. It feels like there's something in me that's different than me and it
uh-huh,
wouldn't be reduced to, either side. So this
uh-huh,
has been such a, hard thing to kind of put into words and figure out, especially when we do get to the science and we're trying to understand, something like the brain and the nervous system and the body and how, literally, how we can study what's really happening when I do have thoughts and feelings.
yeah. Now, can you hear me? I think
Yeah,
we
I
may.
can hear you.
Okay. I thought we may have frozen for a minute. Um, yes. So, yeah. So, it's interesting because sometimes when I would start an introductory class in philosophy of mind, I would ask students whether they thought that that um, that all of their, their thoughts and sensations and things like that were fit. Well, I think I would ask them whether they thought that neuroscience, that the study of the brain is the only thing that can tell us about the mind. And many people, especially science majors, said, yes, of course. And that that everything that happens in the mind will, at least someday in the future, maybe not the near future, but the future will be explained by looking at the brain and maybe even looking at psychology and what psychology says about how certain brain states lead to others. And
Hmm.
and
So they were kind of eliminativist, do you
um,
think? Just
well, no, they're
okay.
physicalists. They
Okay.
think that is that they think that anything that goes on in the mind can be identified. Well, maybe they're eliminativists, but a lot of them
At the
are
extreme
physicalists.
version, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
really weird because, there's all those, I don't know who actually did those, but I often hear that most people are kind of dualists, that they
yeah.
think, yeah, so that's interesting that your students said those both sort of go together. There's this intuitive dualism that people assume but don't think about. But then
Mhm.
when you ask them, will one day we explain everything by study of the brain and the body? Usually they say yes.
Yeah, but these students did the reverse. So
Oh.
I would give them just sort of basic Descartes. Well, can't you imagine that things are going on in the mind without there being um, some sort of physical correlate of it? And then, you get these experiments, these thought experiments about, well, couldn't you be perceiving couldn't you be perceiving something that doesn't exist, or could you be standing above the world and um, and looking down at, I mean, looking down at, of course, is being aware somehow of your body and even more. So that's the idea of being able to think about minds physically without bodies. But it seems that the real clincher of the argument that really grabs students is the version that is put forward by Chalmers in the zombie argument. And Jackson in the knowledge argument. That is, couldn't you imagine that you've got all of this information about the brain states of some individual and all of the effects of what goes on in the world on those brain states and the effects of the interaction of all those brain states on bodily movement? Couldn't you know, or at least have a good justified belief that all that stuff was going on in a creature, and yet they don't have any conscious experience? That is, the lights are on, or maybe the lights aren't on, and nobody's home. That is, couldn't you imagine what Chalmers calls a zombie? And that is a creature that is just like a human being, maybe just like you, uh, neurophysiologically, but doesn't have any conscious experience, that there's nothing that it's like to be that creature. Can you imagine that? Now, some people, are recalcitrant and say no. Others say, and there I think, well, anyway, we don't have to put a label on them, but a lot of people say, yeah, I don't have any guarantee, even if I look very, very assiduously at what's going on in their brain and body, and even what's going on in their brain and body and the world around them that is having some sort of impact on their perceptual systems and thus in their brain eventually. I can imagine or conceive of that all being there, but there's no consciousness. There's nothing that is like, in Thomas Nagel's words, to be that creature. I won't say person, but I will say creature. Now, that grabs a lot of people. And once you get them into thinking that way, it's really hard to get them back down the ladder to physicalism. So it's very interesting. Maybe I
I
should.
think it might also be because we have experiences of, like when you're driving and you don't seem to be sort of aware of what you're doing, or I mean, there's
Yes.
contrast to us that I think get like that zombie thing speaks to in a way that's not actually what's meant by the zombie argument, but that makes us say, oh yeah, I could imagine that. Um, but how do you counter that as a physicalist or as a methodological naturalist, which I think is what you might call
Yeah.
yourself? How do you deal with that?
Well, there are a number of different ways, and they all also come from critics of Descartes back in the 17th century. That one is something that Gassendi said, which is, you think that you are conceiving or imagining your mind without your body. That is, you think you have a clear and distinct idea of each of these things, and that they're not connected, and that that's going to be a guarantee that they're distinct. But really, maybe you don't have such a clear idea of your mind. Maybe the mind is just a bunch of very, very ethereal, physical entities that are sort of floating around, and you just don't, it seems like there's nothing physical there, but it's just that they're sort of too small to recognize, or you don't pay enough attention. And so you're really wrong that you have a clear and distinct idea of your mind and also of your body, and that they're not connected. Okay, so that's one thing that people said, and a lot of people say that now too. You really aren't conceiving of a mind without a body. Uh, and um, or in the zombie case, you really don't have the mental capacity to think about all of this physical stuff at once. And if you did, then you'd recognize that, oh yeah, of course that thing is conscious. Now that doesn't really seem like a very plausible argument, but some people try to make it, along with Gassendi. Now, Arnauld, on the other hand, another critic of Descartes in the 17th century, said, well, uh, there are obvious counterexamples to your claim that you can, if you can conceive of things as existing apart, then they're not, they can't be the same thing. And I mean, he gave an example of um, a triangle, an isosceles triangle. He says, look, you can conceive of an isosceles triangle without conceiving of the Pythagorean theorem, but um, but any isosceles triangle obeys the Pythagorean theorem or any sort of geometrical example like this. And Descartes responds, well, you don't have a complete idea of the triangle and the theorem. If you did, you'd recognize that anything that satisfies the theorem has to be a triangle of that sort. So you really have been deficient in getting a good enough idea. What counts as a good enough idea? Well, that's also left a little bit unclear, but that's what a lot of Descartes' critics said back then. And then a number of critics also said, look, uh, this view is kind of a crazy view because it doesn't account for how it could be that the physical stuff has an effect on the mental stuff and how the mental stuff can cause events going on in the physical world, because that kind of causation, especially causation of physical stuff from the mental, just violates things like the conservation of energy, which people were thinking about at the time, so that it would be very, very difficult to explain how there can be causal connections between the mind and the body. And we all believe that there are. That is, if you stub your toe, you're going to feel pain. And if you
Yeah.
feel pain, that's going to produce effects on your body, just as we said. So causation makes it really hard. So, uh, so
How are
even
you
though
doing
you,
right now? Because I just realized time is flying by. Do you need some water or something, or can we go a little bit longer than we had planned? Because
yes, we can, because I know
okay,
you
thank you.
like
Because we still have a lot to go, but just let me know if you need a break or want some water or ready to go, whatever. Okay.
to,
Okay. So, but what about like conceptual or phenomenal concepts I'm thinking about now, or how you're usually I'm not sure if you're type B physicalist still or what, but there's this, the theory that's relying on the phenomenal concepts. Could you talk about that a little bit here and how, maybe we try to explain something like red or pain or what you're talking about through a brain state, and maybe how these can't actually be, um, how would you say it? I don't know, known through conceptual analysis or something like that till sort of after the fact, even though they're happening as one thing.
yes. Okay. Well, people say, look, I'm having um, a um, a feeling, a sensation. That is, I'm perceiving red, or I'm having an afterimage of yellow orange. That was always Smart's example, JJC Smart, and
Who's
or
one of the sort of founding
yes,
people in this.
of the type identity theory. But gee, so so I'm having this feeling, and I also, I mean, here, think of it this way. Think that you are sitting somewhere and you've got some sort of brain scan attached, and so you can see on the screen what's going on in your brain. Okay. I mean, this is probably more relevant to Jackson's argument, but it can be used as an illustration of all of them, I think. So you are seeing what's going on in your brain, and you are feeling what you're feeling. You are aware of your experience. Okay, so I am seeing red. So there's various things going on in my visual cortex. There's sort of cone stimulation, et cetera, various things that explain what goes on when you see color. And yet, there doesn't seem to be any connection. If all that stuff up there had produced a sensation of green, you know, you wouldn't be able just from feeling this or experiencing this and looking at that there that that sensation had to occur given that this stuff going on in the brain had to occur, is occurring. So in that way, very graphically, you can explain this intuition that there can be the experience of one thing that seems to be completely cut off from your perceptual experience of, or your knowledge, if you will, of what's going on in you right now. So that's pretty stark. So um, that, I think, is a good argument that there really isn't any way that you can spell out the what's involved in feeling like you're having an experience of red or feeling pain or whatever, and or adding more information to what's going on in your brain, and and determining that, oh yeah, there really is a connection after all, a conceptual connection. But you can also say, okay, well, I can't do that, but why do I need there to be a conceptual connection between my ideas of the one and the other in order for those ideas to be picking out the very same thing? Why do I need this? And a lot of people say we don't. But if you want to say that more generally, then you have to, well, you don't have to, but you can say that it seems like you have to say it for all sorts of other things. I mean, again, if we had more time, we could go into more detail about this.
Yeah, there's
But
just so many things we could possibly get into here. We're just glossing over it in a way, but
but my view, and it's the view of many so-called type B materialists, let me say a type A materialist says that, okay, well, we have an idea or a conception of what's going on in our experiences and then what's going on in our bodies. But if we thought more carefully about what was going in our bodies or thought more carefully about what's going on when we're having pain, etc., then we would see that there really is a connection. I mean, after all, think about what goes on when we feel pain. Yeah, there's this sort of ouchy feeling to it, but it's an aversive state. We want to be out of it, or, if we're normal, we want to be out of it. And uh, and that, so it gives rise to another state, this desire, and we can compare it to other states that we've had, other experiences that we've had, and differences and similarities. So there really is a lot of information in our idea of what it's like to be in pain that we're glossing over. And even though looking strictly at what's going on in the brain might not give us more information that would be relevant to the mind, but if you go a little bit more general about what's going on in the brain and take it up a step and say, oh, well, there are these generalizations about what's going on in the brain that have psychological significance about how it is that having certain beliefs and desires produces a behavior of a certain sort, then you can say that, well, if you get more specific about the psychology, then you'll see that there is a connection after all. And that's what Dennett says, and a number of people too. And I used to think that too, that if you could get enough functional information, that is information about the way that these brain states causally interact to produce behavior, then, and you get more information about what's going on when you're having a feeling of pain, then you'll be able to see that they're connected. But now I have changed my mind, and I think that, well, it's unlikely that there will be a conceptual connection between your experience of or your thought about your experience of what's going on in the mind and what's going on even when you get these more higher level generalizations about what's going on in the brain. But there is something special about this phenomenon of separation, conceptual separation here, and that it is that mind-body connections, mind-body identities, even though it seems like there is a lack of connection, conceptual connection, are a special case. That is, in these cases of mind, you get this idea of what is going on in your mind, what's happening when you have sensations. You get it through introspection. That is, you are, well, the term looking in doesn't really get it because looking in sounds awfully bodily, you're looking.
Mm-hmm.
You are aware of a certain kind of event that's going on in you. That is, you can pick it out as that. Um, and so there's really no information there that you need to have other than that your conception, that is, demonstrates some sort of something going on in you. Now, why can't that be something physical? There's no connection between your conception of what's going on in your brain and the conception that picks out in a way that demonstrates, it points to it, that goes on in your mind. But so what? You get that pointing through introspection, and that is a special subjective, if you will, way of pointing to what's going on in you. And given that there really isn't anything to your conception of these mental states beyond picking it out, demonstrating it, and then being able to recognize it if it occurs again, then there there's nothing to be that has to be conceptually connected because it's just a pointer, and introspection is the only way of getting information about something that's substantive that you can do by pointing in this way. Now, somehow,
Okay.
yeah, no, go ahead, because somehow I think that could be clearer.
Well, I was going to say, is it just the same as when we do a science experiment? So we're then noticing as much as we can about whatever we've set up. It's not that we're noticing every single thing, and there's many different scales we could look at it on, and of course we take that as physical. And when we're doing it with our own bodies, it seems somehow different, but is it just sort of the same kind of thing? We're also, noticing as much as we can, and of course we could look at different scales or with different technologies and notice it in different ways. But that idea that it's somehow of a different substance because we're doing it with our own bodies is not necessary. Or how would you push back on that or play with that idea?
So you're saying that, well, in lots of different scientific experiments, you find out more by doing the experiment and looking more deeply at what's going on in the relevant domain, and that you have no problem in saying, oh, yeah, well, a stream of photons, that's what lightning is, even though lightning or common sense concept of lightning is so different from stream of photons, or that, oh yeah, that stuff in that bucket, that that water. We've got this notion of what water is, and then we find out that, oh my God, there's what's really, or what's at least mostly in that bucket is a bunch of H2O molecules, and we have no problem in saying, oh yeah, okay, well, there's no conceptual connection, but we have no problem in thinking that, oh yeah, water, that stuff that we've got this sloshy stuff, is H2O. It's nothing but H2O. You don't have
Exactly.
no
Yeah.
impurities here and there.
is
Oh,
nothing but. I mean, yeah,
yeah.
and we're sort of doing that something similar with our own understanding of what we're calling our thinking and so on. We're trying to understand it better. I don't think it takes away the mystery of, what's in like that there's something in the bucket, whether whatever it is still kind of amazing and crazy if you really think about it. I think it's very similar to our own experience. It's pretty wild, and I understand that we want to think of it as something like different. But if you think, I'm just saying, if you think about, what we're looking at in the world, you can also think you can have that same kind of awe about it. And you can also have that same kind of understanding that I was just trying to express and that you were explaining so well of it's just H2O or whatever.
Yeah. Well, but there's been pushback about that too, because many people say, and a lot of the early identity theorists also said, look, saying that having an after image of orange is just having a certain brain process. I mean, scientists do that all the time. They say that, well, being a streak of lightning is just being a stream of photons. Being a bucket of water is just a matter of being composed of H2O molecules. But the pushback from people like Kripke and Chalmers and Jackson is that, well, the reason that we can say these things about water and H2O or lightning and a stream of photons is that there are um, that what we mean, I mean, all this is contentious, but there is a distinction that they point to whether or not it makes a difference in the end. That, gee, when we talk about water, we are talking about the stuff that comes out of the faucets or fills our lakes and streams. And so, what makes it seem as though it's possible that um, there could be stuff that fills our lakes and streams that is not H2, what makes it seem possible that water, that stuff couldn't be H2O is that we associate water. We mean by the term water, more or less, that the stuff that comes out of our faucets, etc. Now, it may be true that there could be stuff that comes out of our faucets that's not H2O or H2O that's not the stuff that comes out of our faucets. But that doesn't mean that water, that stuff, isn't H2O. We are confusing the possibility that there could be stuff that comes out of the faucets. I mean, think of a world in which you turn on the faucet and there's gin, or there's something that's, has the same effects on that population that water does, but it's made of a different kind of chemical compound. And there could be those situations, those possibilities, but no real possibility that that stuff isn't H2O, given that we have done experiments and found out that it's H2O. I mean, unless it turns out that we're wrong about the science, but there's
Right. I mean,
nothing that gets in the way of thinking that that stuff rather than the stuff that comes out of our faucets, because that could be different from that stuff, is H2O. But you can't do that with mental states. That's what these.
yeah, there would be, I mean, we already talked an hour and a half, so I won't try and push back on all that because we could get into 5 million threads, but a lot of that could be about language in terms of like what in neuroscience is often called behavior cognitive problem, where we've named something and then we're trying to find what we've named and all of this kind of stuff. But to try to get it to a really general level, just for people, like so we don't have to go into all the details, we were thinking about mind as something that's not, able to be known as physical things. And you think that everything is physical. So, like, if we try to just think about this in the most general way, how can we, would it just be that you think we can always, if we had enough sensory skill and technology, somehow understand anything through the body? I guess you might say the brain, but maybe you also think the body too, or the whole central nervous system. I don't know, but that those aren't necessarily like some kind of separate realms that cannot be that are not in contact, but rather there's something that is continuous. Is that fair, or how would you kind of what would you how would you explain that better for people?
Okay, well, briefly, the idea is that um, all thoughts and perceptions and bodily sensations um, are nothing but physical or physical states. Now, by physical, I might include not just what's going on in the brain, but what is going on, I mean, in the rest of the body. I mean, there are various people now, including Antonio Damasio, who's has this neuroscience institute at USC now, who think that it's important for there being conscious experience that there are certain events occurring in the endocrine system of all things. Who would have known? I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
if it's true, but that there are a lot of other things going on in the body that are required, and besides the brain being in certain states or processes going on in the brain that are required for consciousness, that there are certain ways um, that various parts of the brain that are associated with emotions have to be involved. And so you need to have all that stuff going on in order for there to be conscious experience. So my view is that if that's true, then whatever is supposed to be going on to have conscious experience can be explained by appeal to what's going on in the brain and the endocrine system and maybe what's going on in the world. And so all of that stuff, physical, needs to be taken into account. But no matter how much information of that sort you have, and and no matter how much and how closely these events may be correlated with these feelings of what it's like to be in pain, to be perceiving red, to be thinking that Paris is beautiful, whatever that is not going to emerge from your knowledge of all the stuff that's going on. It's still going to seem separate. And this is where the phenomenal concept strategy comes in. That is the idea of this so-called strategy. I mean, it's called strategy in sort of a disparaging way, but I think it's on the right track anyway. That because that there's a special case where you don't have to be able to see that all of this information that determines what conscious experiences you have cannot be connected conceptually with your experiences, with the what it's like, your knowledge of what it's like. But the reason is that you get a special set of concepts, a special way of picking out items in your brain that is that is introspection. You know, you are a subject. You have experiences. So do I. Because you can focus your mind on, from the inside, if you will, on these states from the inside. You can get a panoply of information, if you will, about what is going on in you, what it feels like to do things. But because you've got this, I mean, I don't want to say it's a special sense because it's not like there's some area in the brain that underlies introspection, but you can point to various things. And once you point to them and you point to a bunch, you can compare them and contrast them in terms of what it's like to have them. But because you get this from introspection, then and your own mental states are the only things that you can be picking out by introspection, then you have this special way of determining what's going on. You use your phenomenal concepts, that is, the concepts or the way of thinking about yourself, what's going on inside that comes from introspection. So
Would you
everybody,
be willing to think of that as a skill that we develop or as
um,
something like
well, that's really interesting because there's a lot of stuff about skills. And I think that you can get better and better at identifying different things that are going on, but by practice. I mean, think about what goes on when you take a wine tasting class. that, gee, things that seemed, you know, um, these liquids, these wines that tasted basically the same. Yeah, this one's a little bit sour, this one's sweet, this one kind of gives me a tingling. But you can learn to differentiate these things by, by introspection, by thinking about, oh yeah, now what are these tastes? I mean, are there differences, similarities? You might learn by paying attention to find differences and similarities that you didn't expect before, and you can get better at that too. I mean, and there are people who are particularly trained in taste and smell distinctions because they can be quality checks for people who manufacture these things, or you can have people who are very, very attuned to differences in color to recommend to interior decorators, what exactly the shade of off-white you should use in this room. And, I would never be able to tell. And so, yes, there are ways in which you can get better and better at identifying various ways things seem to you, ways things appear, sensations,
Yeah,
etc.
that's wonderful because that's a kind of noticing. And actually, I was thinking of this in connection to some of the arguments you make, which we don't have time to go into it a lot, but like, why don't we just do only experimental philosophy, forget all this thought experiment stuff? And I was thinking about those, and if we really take you seriously, that being a kind of skill or physical, that critical thinking is actually doing something much more powerful than we've given it credit for in a way. And I seem to hear that a bit in your kind of defense of the armchair philosopher, but I don't know if I'm going too far with that. But what does that bring up for you?
Uh, what I think that the armchair philosopher can do is to take certain counterexamples seriously. That is, gee, well, could I um, be just let me think uh, of some good examples.
You can take your time. I can edit it out. No problem.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. Well, there's, the old case of, knowledge. I mean, can knowledge be something other than justified true belief? And, that's been chewed over for such a long time. Or the trolley problem. I mean, we can
Yeah,
get,
and Gettier cases and all this. I really
yeah,
mean it in a more general sense. Just that philosophy of that nature of thought experiments and some people would just say it's all pointless and we just do experiments and think about the science. And I know you're coming from Quine and naturalism, and you
yes.
do you hold that as that's important. But on the other hand, there's something about critical thinking, which if we really take seriously that this is a physical process or even a skill, which I know I'm pushing a bit here, but an embodied sort of, brain activity, then it does seem that it gets even more important that we do continue doing things like that because it's doing something experimental within itself that is physical. Does that
Yeah,
make sense at all?
yeah, I think that does. I think that's a good way to put it. That my problem, and you mentioned my critical review of Edward Machery's book. I mean, he's great, actually. I mean, he
Oh
does a
yeah,
lot,
yeah, he's great.
but he just, I mean, it's just such an impoverished view of what philosophers can do. I mean, yeah, the cover of his book is really interesting because he shows somebody in an armchair. You can see their back, and they're up against a wall, and that there are just things that are beyond the limits of philosophy, which is the name of his book. But I think that he stops too soon, that there are things that philosophers can actually work out that are things about possibility that are interesting. And sometimes the things about possibility that these thought experiments give rise to not only can quell the tickle that are wondering about the world and what things could be and what's possible and what things must be. Not only does it do that, but it can also get people to re-examine some of the empirical evidence. Say, it seems like there might be a distinction here that you've missed. And so it can affect uh, empirical research too. Now, the book that I've been sort of trying to write, I've been working on for a long time. It's gone through very various uh, incarnations. I've called tentatively The Armchair Near the Window.
Oh,
Now,
beautiful. That's beautiful.
yeah,
I love
so
that title.
I could have Matchery's picture of the armchair, but rather than
By the window instead of the wall.
yes, yes. And
I
so the
think there's
idea,
something to that. I mean, and it's even actually in that spirit of, I'm not sure if we were on camera yet, where I was talking to you about the rigorous ambiguity that I like in your work. I think, you could even look at those views in that way. And yeah, but I mean, that would be a lot to go into his book. But I guess I want to try to bring it like to a bit of a close. Would you be willing to do the Molyneux question another time? Because now we already had almost
yeah.
like if we start it now, we're going to need an hour. So maybe
Okay,
we could
yes,
just
no,
do a short one just on that together. What do you think?
sure.
Okay.
Do it
But
another time. Okay. And also, India, I mean, I know that there were these deeper questions that you didn't get into, and I spent too much time. So if you want to do the whole thing over again, I can do
I
that.
love this. I don't want to do it over again. I think this is actually exactly the right thing for the audience. But for me personally, I really have more things I want to talk to you about. And I know for like some part of the audience, they'll be really interested in those things too. So I say, I still have a few more questions just, to tie it up. But then I think, what if we do kind of special one where we just talk about those really specific things for me and for the kind of nerds of the podcast? What do you think? We can do it later in the spring, but
Hey, that sounds good. Yeah. But just one thing about the window. I mean, the idea being that, well, if you pay attention to what's going on and what's going on in the sciences, then what you take to be possibilities, you might reconsider. And and then and you see, but how does that work? Well, and this gets into an issue that you began to ask about in the questions that you gave me, but we really didn't talk about. How do you change your mind? And what does it take to effect either a slight change in the way that you think about things or even a wholesale change? But the idea here is that a lot of what's going on in these thought experiments is that you are willing to include or not willing to include certain cases as part of the category that you're thinking about. Knowledge, free will, moral action, autonomy, um, and so information about what's going on in the world and what's going on in the sciences, and even information about how other people are thinking about things can either have a direct impact or just somehow seep in and change your inclination to categorize things in certain ways. I mean, I think that's what happened with same-sex marriage. I mean, people were against it, and then they realized that, oh yeah, a lot of people that they know and love who are in a same-sex relationship would like to get married, the way we heterosexuals or whatever do, and want to have families. And, why think that there's something wrong with that? And so all of a sudden, people don't limit their category of legitimate marriages to um, different sex. So, I mean,
wonderful. That's exactly what I was thinking of when I was asking those questions. Yeah, exactly. And I was even thinking about you being the first, I think you were the first tenure track woman philosopher at USC and these kinds of things. Is that related to or that kind of shift in, I mean, the more we sort of notice and experiment and consider and look out the window and so on, if it's done in a rigorous way, which is that kind of precise ambiguity that I'm talking about, um, then there are other possibilities we can notice and be able to handle, which is part of it too.
yeah. Well, I just remember that once somehow an uncle of mine, actually an uncle of my husband's, met um, a friend of mine, very who a woman who looked really glamorous, and he said to her, "You don't look like a philosopher." And she said, "Well, this is what philosophers look like." And
Wonderful. I
yeah, it
love it.
reminded me of Gloria Steinem, who when she turned 50, said, "Well, you don't look 50." And she said, "Well, this is what 50 looks like." And I think that once you start getting used to this, then, I mean, I remember there was a joke well, not a joke, a riddle that I heard as a kid where, oh, this, uh, this a father and a son were in a car accident, and the father uh, was, or I don't know, the father died, and the kid was taken to the hospital to a surgeon, and the surgeon looked and said, "My God, that's my son." And so people were saying, "How could that be?" The father. But then, women are surgeons. I mean, nobody
Yeah.
thinks, I don't think anybody could think that there was a puzzle or a paradox or something to think about more than once there. And, that comes from noticing things about the world and accommodating and, changing your credences accordingly. Now, some people won't. Some people won't look. So you could be staring out the window, but just purposely focusing your attention straight ahead. And people are doing that more these days. And one question, so there are two questions. One is, how do you change your mind? But a prior one these days, it seems, is how can you get yourself into a position where you are willing to change your mind? What goes into that? What do you have to give up? And what do you gain? So,
Yeah, I think you have to be very strong. I think that's one reason I would argue for critical thinking and for philosophy of the nature of the so-called armchair, as long as you're by a window, because it does teach you how to hold tensions and how to understand how to hold things that might not be resolvable, um, which is hard, but does open up the world. I mean, if anything, it gives you more windows and it lets you go outside those windows, which I think can be very hard for people, right? We sometimes we'd rather not know there's a whole other way of being in the world or other worlds to experience because we don't know how to handle it.
yeah, and it might, um, and identity, group identity, really plays a big role here too. I think that if you even look elsewhere, then you're betraying your group. And that seems to be more and more the case.
That's a good point too. And we get a lot of more peer pressure of don't dare look out the window, because,
I read your
and
book.
there's a lot of that, which is very, never ends well. But just before we go, can you tell me just a little bit, have things changed? I mean, because you were in this exciting moment in philosophy for us who are philosophy nerds, and you were one of the first women, you were, for me, that's a really amazing thing. And I just wonder, like, if you have anything you want to share about that before we go, if things have changed or, um, if it was, not the way I'm imagining it. I was thinking about your friend Tamara Horowitz, I think too. For some reason, I just want to mention her because I know she was at MIT with you, I think, and she became the
At
first.
Chicago too.
Hmm?
She was at Chicago too. We
She
were
was at
under,
Chicago too. Oh wow, you knew her that long. Oh
yes,
wow.
and I continue to know her because she got a job at the University of Pittsburgh and became chair of the department. And my mother lived in Pittsburgh, so every
Oh
time
wow.
I visit my mother, I'd visit her too. And
Yeah, that's what I wanted to mention because she was the first. I mean, Pittsburgh is a big, school for us philosophers too, and she was the first female chair there. So I just want to mention that because I want people to know that you were there and she was there, and these things feel important to me. But I guess from your perspective, maybe it was just life. But if there's anything you would like to share about that, or just anything at all about any of that that you might want to share with people that you feel, yeah, should be part of the record somehow.
yeah, well, I would like people. Uh, well, I just she was a very close friend, and she died of a brain tumor, much too young, I mean, before she was 50. So that was so because I just thought that, she was doing some interesting things and would go on and do a lot of interesting things philosophically. But, I didn't care about philosophy. Um,
Yeah,
she was a friend
we
and
lost a
sort of
friend.
became part of our family because my mother would visit her a lot in the hospital and things like that. So, um, but I was just feeling that, when I gave that lecture, that, I wanted to acknowledge her because, she could have given one too if she'd lived. Um, so I just wanted to mention her. But
I'm really glad you did.
yeah, but in terms of changes, there are more women in philosophy. They had been assigned to, um, well, not assigned to, but they were, I guess, encouraged to pick so-called softer subjects, such as ethics and moral philosophy, value philosophy. But now there have been a number of different changes. One is that there are lots more women in all these fields, and in the so-called, hardcore, metaphysics, epistemology, philosophy of language, logic, philosophy of science, and two, that a lot of the so-called soft subjects, like ethics, moral philosophy, have become very technical, maybe to their detriment in some cases. All across the board. Sometimes people are substituting kind of technical results for things that really have philosophical interest. I think it might be going in the other direction now. But also so-called um, uh, fringe studies like um, work about women and gender and race, which were, oh yeah, these are just very specific. They don't have general important philosophical consequences. People are taking them a lot more seriously because, first of all, it opens up different questions, not just about these particular issues. Are there intrinsic differences between women and men? Are genders binary? Are there any physical properties or psychological properties that are different for different races? All those things. Not only does it open those questions, but it makes you reconsider certain other more general questions about, the way things could be and even ways of characterizing the way they are. And so all that is important. And something that you asked me about with respect to changes, I think is really important too. Good for women and good for men, which is that now, when I came to MIT, uh, there I knew nothing really, and there weren't any courses except for a pro seminar run by Richard Cartwright that you had to take. But and he did every class that he did was formalized in certain ways. And for example, I had to prove Plato's third man argument using Zermelo-Fraenkel's set theory. I think I did it. I can't remember how.
Wow.
It probably wasn't very elegant, but so
But you did it,
you
so
know, Um, and so, what you were required to do was pretty minimal. And then you got no instruction in teaching. And I was thrown into teaching an undergraduate class by myself. And, there really wasn't very much guidance. You had to take general examinations, but you could choose the topics very narrowly. I think I did one on Hume's epistemology, which, that doesn't really provide a survey of knowledge of epistemology. But in any case, now I believe, at USC and I think at other places too, when students come in, they have a fairly set number of requirements that they have to do. At every stage, you've got people looking at your work and making suggestions. I mean, some people think that this is terrifying, but we've managed to soften it in ways that they think mostly are just going to be helpful. And so you learn how to do these things early on. You get guidance, real guidance from faculty members. Each student gets assigned a mentor for the first couple of years. Then you get advisors for your preliminary exam and then your thesis. There are dissertation seminars. There are practice job talks. And you also not only are assigned as TAs to classes where, you sit in the class and you learn the stuff and then you discuss it with the students, but there's special teaching seminars where you learn how to teach. Uh, so uh,
That's a big difference. That's a
it's a
very good difference. It's actually great you point that out because I think it's something we take for granted in a way.
Yes, and it really wasn't that way. And it's so much better that it is that way. And there are also, independent, philosophers. I mean, I just mean, I don't mean they're independent. They're teaching somewhere, but they get together, get a certain amount of funding to give sort of mentoring seminars for women at certain stages. Louise Antony does a lot of this work, and Jen Dowling and Sally Haslinger, and that they get these women in early positions. They've just gotten hired, they're assistant professors, and they get people to share their work and to help each other. And the hope is that the relationships will go on after the couple months that they work on these things. And they get feedback from more experienced people, not just about their work, but about what to expect at each stage of their progression, what the pitfalls are, what some of the mansplaining, if you will, that they're going to encounter at various positions. And so that's really good. And there are also uh, seminars for for graduate students. And these are ones that are usually done in the university. USC has an informal thing where, people can learn how to ask questions. A lot of women, I think, used to be afraid to ask questions because usually somebody would um, ask a sort of bombastic question that would, I mean, after a colloquium speaker, that would kind of veer the conversation in one way, which might not be the most interesting way. And so we at USC always allow graduate students to ask questions first before faculty come. And people at least are taught informally, look, you might be afraid to ask a question, but a lot of people do, and maybe they don't seem so great after the fact, but just ask a lot of questions. And so you'll have some good ones, and those will be the ones that are remembered, and that here's a way to go about it. And so being able to express yourself takes a lot of different forms. You don't have to be so aggressive. You don't have to be the first person to put up your hand. You can still formulate something and be confident that it will be interesting enough to be answered. And so people are given explicit instructions about this. So the idea that you're innately good at this or are a complete failure just isn't right. You have to wait sometimes for people's confidence to build, and that what they're um, good at can come out. And the best way to think about this thing, and I think we are starting to do that at USC, is to, we spend a lot of time choosing and entering class. It takes days and days of meetings and deliberation. And so you have to be confident that you picked a good class, that these are good students. And so what you have to do is to figure out how to get them um, uh, to fulfill the potential that you yourself noticed and chose them for. You did a good job. That is, we did a good job. And you have to think of things that way. And then you'll be more patient, and you will allow late bloomers to bloom. and they often do. I mean, sometimes
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for saying that. Because that makes all the difference. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who, are maybe famous now or whatever. It doesn't matter if you're famous or not. Just people who are happy in what they do, let's say, or have made a difference, who'd say it was some teacher who noticed them and did exactly what you just said. It makes such a big difference.
yeah, and if it's policy, then that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just before we go, last kind of thing is, I always ask about love and care, and if there's anything that you want to say about those words relative to all this we've been talking about, or just your general career. Maybe it's about teaching, or maybe it's about philosophy, or I don't know, but just does anything come to mind there relative to that word and that, yeah, love?
Well, one thing, Andrea, that I want to thank you for is, I mean, I'm retired now. I don't know if you know that.
I
And
wasn't sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
for the last couple of years, and I've had it's sort of hard to adjust to, and I've had various other issues, some health issues. I mean, nothing life-threatening, but and it's it's sort of easy to let the days go by and not really be thinking about things. But when you asked me to do this, I found myself really, really engaged and very, very interested and wanting to go back and think more about the questions you asked me, especially the ones at the end about how people change their minds and how people can wall themselves off from even giving themselves a chance to think about things. And I had had these ideas about how to at least do some research. I mean, I don't even know if I can, I was going to say to attack these questions, but I don't even know if I'm in the position to attack. But this made me feel much more energized about getting back to this, and also made me realize that, yeah, the questions that I was interested in throughout my career are still interesting. And I'd like to
Absolutely.
think about them more. And so I suppose it made me feel very good about what I've been working on. That is, I mean, maybe not so good about the products, but good about the fact that to me, these were very interesting. And when I was thinking more about questions like, how do you get people to change their minds? How do you get yourself to change your mind if it seems like you need to? And how identity plays into it, and how forces that are there and increasingly powerful can get in the way of real knowledge and changing your mind for the better. I mean, getting closer to the truth. And then, people have said that the truth doesn't matter. I think it does. But then you have to say more clearly why. And so those are things that I'd like to think about more. And there's, of course, AI too, which we haven't got a chance to do, but
Yeah.
a lot of
Well, let's
stuff
leave
about
that aside for now because that would be,
identity.
but I'm so glad you said that. And I actually love that question and the way that you've been discussing it about how do you get people to change their minds, or how do you create a kind of environment where it's possible, or the different ways we've been phrasing it. And I just want to invite you, if you want to try, I don't know if you've ever tried to write something a little less like a paper and more like a short kind of post, more actually like your speech that you gave, which is really beautiful. You're always welcome. We have a little blog that goes with this show. I mean, a lot of people watch it and read it, and I know they would be super interested to hear or read more about this if anything comes to mind, because as I told you, your work is very important, and I want I want you to know that people are thankful for it, and it does matter. And these are interesting questions, and I think they become even more interesting with time. And that's why I try to connect care to it, because it's what we really care about that actually is, changing and mattering and continuing. So just open invitation if you ever want to do that. You're always you're welcome to be a guest author anytime.
Well, thank you. And And as I said, sort of just in passing, but I think this is true too, I've been thinking more about what would take to get me to change my mind. And I think that's a good first step.
That's a really good first step and very interesting to think about. But
Yes, hard to think
yeah,
about.
I really appreciate you, and I just love this conversation. And thank you so much for spending this time with me, and also for your career and the work you've done. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
It was. Is there anything else that you want to say before we go, or are we good for now?
I think we're good, but I'd be happy to come back and talk about Molly now.
Okay, great. And maybe who knows, maybe how you change your mind. Let's see.
Yeah, okay. Remind about that. But I won't.
I'll try to get you to change your mind to want to talk about changing your mind.
Okay. Oh, all
Uh,
right. Well, I mean, that'd be fun too.
all right. Thank you so much, Janet.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.